Pleased to introduce Francesco, who will be talking about the Schismogenesis of consciousness science.
Yeah.
And sorry if I got that wrong. So we have 20 minutes, including questions. And
should I start? Okay. So thank you, everybody. My name is Francesco Ellia. I'm a postdoc researcher at ATR in Japan and associate researcher or something here at Monash University. But it's the first time I'm in Australia, so very nice to be here. So this, as you can see, is a QR code that will lead to the preprint, but the paper is still under review, and so we actually changed the title halfway through. So if you see a different title, it's actually on purpose. And so let's take a look back to the past 35 years of consciousness science, which of course is a broad period, but we can observe roughly three phases. A first initial phase is starting from the 90s, where there were the first empirical success and the first initial enthusiasm, and were characterized by this holy quest for the neural correlates of consciousness. This idea that if we were able to find the neural correlates, that then that there was a definition that was developed over this decade, then that would have amount to a good or best explanation for what is consciousness from a neurobiological standpoint. But then from the early 2000s, theoretical proliferation started. So on the one side, we had empirical refinement. We had all these philosophical debates that start to get deeper and deeper. So for example, a bit earlier in the 90s, we start talking about the art problem, but also the overflow argument and all these things. But I would say that what really characterized those years was the theories of consciousness start to pop up like mushroom overnight. And I'm pretty sure if we make a survey here, everyone has different theory. And then in a new, I would say still ongoing phase that started roughly 5 years ago, where we actually try, because we have so many theories, we actually try to arbitrate among them, whether on theoretical ground and comparison, or through adversarial collaborations that have become a big thing. Yet we have so many problems in this field. We have the art problem, which, sorry for the synthesis, but is essentially the problem: how do we get the phenomenal through the physical substrate, or what is the relation at the metaphysical level? And then we have the meta problem. So why do we think that the art problem is art in the first place? What is so special about consciousness? Why our intuition about it conflate with what normally happens in science? And finally, we have the real problem, of course, so many variations of all of these. The real problem, like proposed by Anil said, that we should only focus on the brain mechanism and find systematic correlation and sort of forget about all this more philosophically nuanced problem and just get more data. Yet there is, especially because we have so many different theories, there is a potential issue and a potential problem in the history of science, which is the problem, so to say, of incommensurability. So when we have different paradigm or working theories, the lack of a common measure between them make the comparison very difficult. And the lack of a common measure, because different paradigm or different frameworks are focused on different foundational questions. They use different concepts, so maybe even what they call as consciousness is something different within the respective framework, and it doesn't have a proper translation in your own operating framework. And of course, this has a cascade effect on the methods and all these things. So essentially, when we try to compare these frameworks, but we cannot put them into a bigger picture where each terms can be effectively compared, then even just evaluating genuine progress can be impossible. And the result, as probably some of you that have paid attention to the field noticed, there is a tendency where different proponents of different theories tend to talk past each other rather than to each other. So essentially, again, we come back to this issue. We have too many theories of consciousness. They probably talk about different things. They talk about different problems. And how can we arbitrate about them? And can we just rely on experiment? Can we have this sort of naive intuition that there will be a crucial experiment that will prove my theory and disprove all of their theory? Seems hard to believe so. But on the other hand, we believe, and this is why we introduced this this work and this sort of meta-theoretical framework, if you want, is that because we think that there are all these there are some parallel disputes at least, that they reflect deeper unresolved tensions in the conceptualization of consciousness itself. So, yeah, in this not super self-explanatory pictures, show three different dimensions or axes that we took as relevant. These are three debates that have been developed over the past few years, and on apparently non-convergent or separate topics. But instead, we argued that it makes even more sense when we combine them and we use them to evaluate where different theories or theoretical frameworks stands in terms of assumptions, method, and as we will see, scope and perspective. So let's start with the, in a sense, easiest one, which is what we call the explanatory medium, which is not the best term. And if anyone has a suggestion, we still haven't resubmitted the paper. Essentially is, as you might be familiar, there are theories that are traditional functionalist theory. There are theories that collocate themselves in what has been called recently the structural turn. And, and of course, there is a lot of stuff in between. And in this paper, we argued that it still makes sense to talk about theories that are functionalist and theories that are more characterized by a structural approach. Even though there are now a recent paper by Fleming and Shea where it argues that some computational functionalist theory can be extended to embrace a structural perspective. And yet we think that basically there is a continuum, so where it's still meaningful to talk about these two sort of extreme, but there is also a significant overlap between them. Yet what is relevant, even when we talk about this overlap, is, so to say, the direction of the explanation. So if we take a theory like integrated information theory that starts from structural premise, which, by the way, here we use structure in the broadest possible sense, which includes traditional quality spaces, or again, the idea that the experience itself is structured, and basically, again, everything in between. So it's very general. And as I was saying, like what matters here is also the direction of the explanation. So starting from structural premises to arrive to functional properties or functional aspects of consciousness still makes sense, as much as the other way around. So starting from functionalist premises to then develop a structural account. And we can go back this maybe to the question if someone has, as I anticipate, something to say about it. And then another debate that we think is very relevant is the debate on scope. What should be the scope of a theory? And again, if you follow some of the many controversies that have happened recently, for example, there has been a certain pushback from a part of the community against theories that suggest or imply Pamsek's implication, for example, right? And so a very relevant question is, what should be the scope of a theory of consciousness? Should it apply only to organism, as we saw yesterday, or should it be a universal theory, so which in principle can give a yes or no answer when applied to any physical system in the universe, which is very ambitious and of course has the risk to be a little bit detached from the daily empirical practice, which can be potentially an issue, but at the same time is something that we might want because we want to figure out consciousness in different systems, like different organism, or even now everyone is very concerned with AI. And finally, there is this other debate, which is maybe a little bit minor compared to the two, but I believe more, even more relevant. And sorry, something I forgot to mention before, when we look at this scope, of course, it's an inclusion relation. So what we called local in the first paper, but now we are actually changing word, is actually a restriction of this universal scope. So there is a sort of inclusion relation, and this the border of this restriction or the amplitude of this restriction can be obviously negotiated theory by theory. So just the fact that you are not universal, by definition, you are restricted, but it doesn't mean that all restricted or all theories that have a restricted scope have the same scope. Some might be broader or narrower. And finally, the perspective. So we think that there is this third looming dimension in the background of all of this debate that is what really characterizes the broadest division between different framework and different theoreticians, which is what we call perspective, and by referring to intrinsic and extrinsic perspective. So the intrinsic perspective is something, for example, that we believe Nagel talk about, and of course the IIT is very concerned with the intrinsic perspective and this idea that consciousness should be explained by the perspective of the system itself. It shouldn't depend, or the explanation shouldn't rely upon an external observer from a sort of third-person vantage point, which, by the way, is what has happened for a century in science. This is literally what Galileo in the Essayer brought up as the method of science, as the sort of modern rebirth of the scientific method. So in a sense, it's perfectly understandable and logical that this intrinsic perspective is seen as suspicious and potentially unscientific. While on the other hand, we have this extrinsic perspective, which is much more aligned and in line with the traditional methods of the cognitive science. Is what, again, also fits in this broader picture of the Galilean science. But seem to find its limitation when it comes to address what is like to be a system, what is the phenomenal character of experience taken as independent from external observer. So now we can come to this cryptic word of schismogenesis, of what is the schismogenesis of consciousness science. So what we think we are observing in the field is a schismogenetic process, which is this sort of sociological, but also influenced by purely theoretical assumption and consequence, where we have reciprocal differentiation that amplified contrastive commitment. What does it mean? It means because I start with certain assumptions, I'm more likely to endorse certain implication. And because I'm now endorsing those implications, I'm more likely to endorse other implications. But if this direction is divergent in the field, you have basically reiterating cycle that sort of stand stronger on their position, on their initial position, that are influenced again by logical, but also sociological factors. Yeah. And finally, we have this, and why is that? Because we believe that these different dimension or axis that we highlighted earlier jointly and individually, but especially jointly, condition what count as evidence. So if you, let's say, are more structural and universal, you will think that the consciousness science should take certain facts as evidence as more reliable than others. And therefore, the way you interpret findings and which research program you should prioritize. So, for example, you might think that the universal research program is even completely crazy, because this is something that looks more like fundamental physics rather than psychology, which should be the focus of consciousness science if you have certain assumptions. So basically, we believe that there is this impasse, as I mentioned earlier, in the field, where we have this theoretical convergence, but theoretical proliferation without convergence. And we propose this meta-theoretical framework to try to make sense of what's going on in the field without having a specific judgment about it. So we try to describe what's going on. And finally, yes, this thing maybe shouldn't be there, but in the end, what we want to say is that we have disagreement on foundational issue that can lead to this incommensurability that I mentioned earlier, especially when fostered by this kind of schismogenetic processes. And most importantly, theory need to clarify their assumption, and this is something that it's really implicit in the theoretical paper when you read them, and make a genuine effort to avoid talking past each other. And finally, what we believe at this specific stage that is relevant is theoretical pluralism. So advancing different research program without prematurely discharging any of them, and at the same time continue the exchange at the periphery. So whenever we have this kind of overlaps that we highlighted early, this is fertile territory for hopefully good and positive exchange that will actually foster progress. So yeah, take home message: empirical testing without theoretical work is not sufficient, at least so we believe, to arbitrate between theory. And we need, again, to clarify assumption. And finally, let's embrace chaos. And maybe, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for the questions. Can I answer the question?